Following on from our last discussion in October of 2024, where we reflected on quite a number of things, actually, the US election, unrest in the Middle East, the economic tailwind in China or not. With what we now know about Trump being sworn in as president and the rapid unfolding of his cost-cutting, tariff-heavy economic policies, what do you think lies ahead for continued geopolitical instability, Jonathan?
Well, there's a lot in that opening question, Eugene, as you know very, very well. Yes, January the 20th, we now have Donald Trump back in the White House. And my goodness gracious me. So what date is it today, Eugene? The 13th of February. So it's not even 4 weeks, and it feels like 4 years.
I know.
So he's got another 3 years and 11 months and 10 days to go. And as a friend of mine in Texas remarked to me very dryly the other day, he's already done more press conferences in 3.5 weeks than Biden did in 4 years. Clearly, my friend in Texas is a Trump supporter, but he certainly hit the ground running in this administration. You might remember that when he won in 2016, everyone was flabbergasted because very few predicted it. And when he arrived in the White House in 2017, it was pretty chaotic, to be frank. This time around, he's hit the ground running. So we've just seen a blizzard of executive actions or executive orders, and we've also seen the creation of his new cabinet, and we've seen Scott Bessent at U.S. Treasury. Now, I'm a big fan of Scott Bessent, so I just want to put that out there. So I have a bit of a conflict of interest. I can't be too neutral on this one, because of course Scott Bessent is a very, very well known and admired, respected global macro hedge fund manager. So I kind of think about the world the same way that he does. But I think he's a first class candidate. And then of course at state, the State Department, we've got Marco Rubio. So nothing really too much to say about Marco Rubio. We know him incredibly well. Scott Bessent, I think, is as they say in England, top draw, first class candidate. But all in all, it's not just been on the domestic front where we've seen this rapid fire implementation and then lifting of tariffs, 25% on Mexico and Canada, obviously America's two largest trading partners when you add exports and imports together. And I was really quite shocked when I saw that. And I said so in my pain report that I couldn't really understand it. And then, of course, he rescinded it, 24 hours later. So we got kind of whiplash just in his first few days in the Oval Office. And because, of course, the Mexican Canadians agreed to dispatch 10,000 soldiers to the southern and northern borders. However, the 10% on China, the 10% tariffs on China stays in place. And there's more stuff to happen there. More latterly, he's now putting tariffs on aluminium and steel, one of his favorites. And I think the European Union is next. I know we're amongst friends in this conversation, Eugene, but I don't think it's any secret that Donald Trump really doesn't like the European Union, and he doesn't like most of the leaders. Anyway, so I'm kind of bracing for that next shock. The big conversation, obviously, in terms of the domestic economy is how inflationary will these tariffs be? We've all read hundreds of academic papers. Unfortunately, the tariff debate, like everything in life today, has been contaminated by partisan politics. So we get left-wing academic economists saying that they're super inflationary. Then we have right-wing academic economists saying that they're not really that inflationary. I'm kind of in the middle on this one, Eugene. I think tariffs will be inflationary, but marginally inflationary. And again, it's all about the size of the tariff and also whom is actually tariffed. So if he had imposed massive tariffs on Mexico and Canada, yes, that would have been quite significant because so many goods cross those borders. The automobile industry, as we know, for example, the components that make up an automobile, a car, sometimes cross the Mexican and the United States border 6 times before they actually are put into the final assembly of a car. So imagine that tariff impact. So it's really, really complex stuff. But at the end of the day, I think I'm on the side of tariffs will be marginally inflationary. But I think we can agree, I think we can, that they are disruptive to commerce, to economic goods, and transactions across borders. So net, and this is a big debate amongst the hedge fund community at the moment, is, will the tariffs on balance be somewhat stagflationary, meaning dampening economic growth while slightly elevating inflation? And then, of course, there's the geopolitical arena. And Eugene, you and I have lots of conversations about these things. Look, it's impossible to be brief. All I'll do is update everyone listening to this that just not many hours ago, Vladimir Putin and Donald Trump had a phone call and they've agreed to meet. It looks like Trump might be on his way to Moscow. I thought he was going to go to Beijing and meet Putin there. But the bottom line is Trump has elevated the discussion and negotiation around Ukraine. And there's a huge amount of chatter, which I won't get into in foreign policy circles in the last 6 hours, about the meeting between Putin and Trump and how much Trump will give up, how much will he concede to appease Vladimir Putin. This is a big, big conversation at the moment. Oil prices dropped on the news. Oil prices dropped quite sharply because they think that that will mean Russian oil, if there's a negotiated truce, will come back into the market. And then, of course, there's the Gaza, the ongoing tragedy, humanitarian catastrophe in Gaza. And every day we watch, incredibly emotionally, the release of hostages. And it's an incredibly emotional conversation. So the bottom line is Trump is engaged there as well. We all know how. So one of my quick observations, and I know we can't stay too long on the geopolitical affairs because there's so much to talk, for example, about the inflation that came out overnight. But the bottom line for me is when all is said and done in 4 years' time, Eugene, when hopefully we're still having these wonderful conversations, I don't think we'll look back at the Trump administration in 4 years from now and view him as isolationist. Many people in foreign policy circles describe Donald Trump as an isolationist. He is not an isolationist. He's already involved in Gaza, Israel. And of course, I haven't even brought Iran to the conversation yet. We may not have time for that. But obviously, there's Russia, there's Ukraine. And of course, the really big one is the discussion, negotiation, conversation between Xi Jinping and Donald Trump, which awaits us, I think, in the next several months.
Really interesting, Jonathan. And there's just so many different pieces to the inflation and market jigsaw puzzle, as you sometimes refer to it. So just going back to Trump and his tariff agenda. So what happened with Mexico was really interesting. He fired off, you could call it now a threat of a 25% tariff. He seemed to get what he wanted from Mexico, and then he quickly took it off the table. And a lot of commentators, including yourself, have suggested that in many cases he doesn't really want to impose a tariff. He's doing it as a bargaining chip to try to get a better deal or a better outcome in terms of his relationship with certain countries. Do you think that is pretty strong evidence to confirm that? And in many cases where he's actually threatening a tariff, there may not actually be a tariff if he can get an outcome somewhere else. What do you say to that?
No, I think you're absolutely right, Eugene. And there's a lot of conversation around this topic because we're all trying to understand, the art of the deal. So yes, Trump uses tariff or the threats of tariffs as a means of leverage to enhance his position in terms of the negotiation. And you're absolutely right. He announced the tariffs on Mexico and Canada, and then had conversations with the new president in Mexico almost immediately. And she offered to send 10,000 troops to the border, and also, by the way, emphasized that they were really, really going to, buckle down on containing the drug cartels, which are sending, vast amounts of fentanyl across the border into the United States. And so basically Trump got what he wanted. So he said, yeah, great. Thanks very much for the call. I'll lift the tariffs. Or basically he said, I will review them in 30 days time. Yeah. And then Justin Trudeau finds out from the president of Mexico what she said to Trump, and apparently called up and said, hey, Mr. President, guess what? I'm going to send 10,000 troops to the Canadian border. And Trump said, it's funny you mentioned that. I just had a phone call with the president of Mexico. She just offered to do the same. So Trudeau put on the table exactly what the president of Mexico had, and Trump said, okay, done. I'm lifting the tariffs. And don't forget, just before that, we had the incident with Colombia, where the president of Colombia, so Trump initially imposed tariffs on Colombia. Why? Because they wouldn't receive or accept illegal immigrants that Trump was deporting from the United States back to Colombia. And initially, they wouldn't allow U.S. military aircraft to land in Bogota. And then the president of Colombia said, "Hey, no, that's okay. I'll send my own presidential jet to pick them up." So he got his way there as well. I'm not so sure about Europe, Eugene. I think he's going to go through with tariffs on Europe, and obviously he has imposed 10% tariffs, which are on top of existing tariffs on China. Remember, Trump first imposed tariffs on China in 2017-18. Biden then continued those tariffs. The Democrats kept quiet about that. They actually maintained all of Trump's tariffs through the Biden administration. While criticizing him for all kinds of things, it's continued his policy. And then, so more latterly, he imposed an additional 10% on China.
It's hard to switch off these income streams for governments once they're there. So yeah, interesting. And you talked about Trump and Putin. Trump meeting up with Putin. I have listened to a few of his speeches, some of the ones that you've recommended, particularly the one in Davos, and yeah, he really wants the war in the Ukraine to end, from what he says anyway. And that is one thing about Trump. He does tend to follow through on the things that he says he's going to do, for all his other faults, and we haven't got time for that today. So watch this space, I guess. Wouldn't it be wonderful? It's been almost 3 years since that conflict tragically began.